Are you excited about a top-of-the-line phone that does not come in a giant size? If so, the 6.1-inch iPhone 14 Pro is one of few out there, as it's both compact and even more powerful than before. Apple calls this one a Pro, so it includes a few pro-grade features like a larger sensor that can capture 48MP RAW photos with a lot more detail, ProRes video you can edit and post, and a new A16 Bionic chip that powers all of those things. But make no mistake, this is a device as much for the pros as for the rest of us who just want to have the best and latest gadget. iPhone 14 Pro spec. An overview of the iPhone 14 Pro specs reveals that Apple has focused in two areas: a brand new A16 Bionic processor and a larger sensor 48MP main. Interestingly, the iPhone 14 Pro price in the US starts at the same $1,000 as last year's model. But in other markets like the UK and Europe, there is a big price hike. In those countries, the iPhone 13 Pro starting price was €1,150, while the iPhone 14 Pro now starts at €1,300. iPhone 14 Pro design. Colors. With flat sides and a triple rear camera, the iPhone 14 Pro design has not changed much in the past 2 years. Still, the dimensions are just slightly different from previous models, and the camera unit is even larger now. Just enough so your old 13 Pro cases don't fit this new model. Apple uses the newest and most advanced toughened glass, the so-called ceramic shield, with a shiny stainless frame in the middle that is unfortunately still a fingerprint magnet. Apart from that, though, this is a premium design that looks good. iPhone 14 Pro display. The iPhone 14 Pro comes with a 6.1-inch screen size, OLED technology, same 1107 type resolution, but it has upgraded ProMotion. The screen can now go as low as 1 Hz refresh rate. The 13 Pro could only go down to 10 Hz, and this enables a new always-on display with glanceable information and a dimmed version of your wallpaper. Android phones have had always-on screens for nearly a decade now. So this is a finally moment for Apple, but one has to admit that this implementation looks very well made on the new iPhone. iPhone 14 Pro camera. All cameras are improved on the iPhone 14 Pro, but it is the main camera in particular that gets the biggest upgrade. You get a 65% larger sensor, and with it, a jump from the 12MP resolution we used to have to a much more impressive 48MP one. By default, however, the camera still captures 12MP photos, smartly combining 4 pixels into one in a process called main camera. Despite having a brand new sensor, actual differences in 1x photos during the day are minuscule. The wider field of view, 24 vs 26, would be appreciated by some. But it's hard to call this a real advantage. Colors and processing are about the same. Everything is mostly the same. Look closer at the grass, though, and you notice the more detailed look out of the 14 Pro, which might just be the one advantage you can actually spot. Ultra-wide camera. It's similarly hard to see much of a difference in photos captured with the ultra-wide camera in daytime. The 13 Pro Max might be a bit more susceptible to flare, and there might be a bit more detail at the edges thanks to that narrower f/2.2 aperture, but that's about it. Portrait mode. The iPhone 14 Pro still captures 1x and 3x portraits, but those look mostly the same to the previous generation. The real difference maker is the glorious return of the 2x portrait mode, and we're so glad it's back. This is the most versatile focal length, just perfect for portraits. And no wonder a similar nifty 52x lens is the first prime lens for many pro and enthusiast photographers. Zoom. Apple uses the higher res, bigger 48MP main camera sensor and crops out the middle part to achieve an optical grade 2x quality, and it indeed lives up to expectations. Compared to the sensor from previous generation iPhone, you can see the better resolved detail in the 14 Pro. Front camera. Despite the added autofocus on the front camera, we don't really see a big change in detail in faces. However, what we do see is Apple getting rid of that reddish and flat skin tone that plagued previous iPhones, and now you have way more contrast, and less of that flat look with more highlights and shadows appearing. Subtle, but nice. The real magic of iPhone 14 Pro camera, however, happens behind the scenes with a new Photonic Engine, an optimized workflow available thanks to the more powerful A16 chip that is an enhanced image pipeline, which brings big improvements to low-light photos for all cameras. iPhone 14 Pro performance and benchmarks. The new Apple A16 Bionic chip makes a big leap to a new manufacturing process, 4 nanometers. This allows Apple to cram in nearly 16 billion transistors, compared to around 15 billion on 13 Pro, but also helps with power efficiency and performance. Apple threw a shade at the competition, saying that their best still cannot match a 2-year-old iPhone. But it did point out that the A16 is nearly 40% faster than the competition, and we would assume there would be a comparison to some Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chip. iPhone 14 Pro connectivity. Before we jump into modems and all that good stuff, did you know that some iPhone 14 models come with no SIM tray? More specifically, all US-bound iPhone 14 models do not support traditional SIM cards, and instead make the switch to eSIM. International models, however, will still ship with support for traditional SIM cards, since obviously many carriers outside the US are not ready for such a transition yet. This is one important detail to know, so keep that in mind. iPhone 14 Pro and iOS 16 new features. The iPhone 14 Pro launches with the latest iOS installment, iOS 16, with a new customizable lock screen, media player, and other refinements. But of course, it is the unique dynamic island element that older iPhones will not have, and that might just be the coolest software feature of the 14 Pro. There are a couple of new features that may not sound quite as cool, but that might one day save your life. SOS via satellite. First is SOS via satellite. Thanks to a combination of new hardware, software, and infrastructure, you will be able to alert emergency services if you are lost in a mountain or in trouble in the middle of nowhere with no signal. The important detail here is that in order for this to work, you would need to keep your iPhone at a direction it would indicate to you for somewhere from 15 seconds to a couple of minutes to connect to a satellite. Crash detection. The other important feature is crash detection, which is just what it sounds like. A new high-G accelerometer works in concert with other sensors and a machine learning algorithm, and can detect if you end up in a serious car crash. Your iPhone will then give you a short countdown for you to react, and if no reaction follows, it will again call emergency services. iPhone 14 Pro battery. The iPhone 14 Pro keeps the same all-day battery life as the 13 Pro. This is not a bad thing. The 13 Pro was a considerable upgrade from previous generations, but still, we hope for a bit more. The 14 Pro comes with a 3200 mAh battery, a slight 3% increase from the 3095 mAh battery on the 13 Pro. Apple's official iPhone 14 Pro battery life numbers are the following: 20 hours of video streaming and 75 hours of audio playback. Exactly the same as on the 13 Pro. iPhone 14 Pro charging speeds. iPhones traditionally have not had the fastest charging speeds compared to the competition, and the iPhone 14 Pro is not doing much to change that. iPhone 14 Pro audio quality and haptics. The iPhone 14 Pro keeps the same audio setup as the 13 Pro, with the bottom-firing main speaker helped by a secondary speaker located in the earpiece. These loudspeakers sound excellent, maybe just a tiny bit louder than the 13 Pro Max, but similarly great with a lot of depth considering this is a phone speaker. Also, there is no 3.5mm headphone jack on the iPhone 14. Not a surprise. Overview. The iPhone 14 Pro combines a reasonable 6.1 size with incredibly powerful performance, upgraded camera, and a clever new dynamic island feature. But at the same time, it looks very similar to the previous model. Is the new 48-megapixel sensor worth upgrading? If you're a photo geek, maybe. Is the dynamic island the thing to make you switch? Well, it's cool, but not quite a game changer. We are going to end this video right away. If you have any query or information to share, please leave a comment below. Thanks for watching.